Thank you, Count Corla, for giving me the opportunity to introduce the Freedom of Information Amendment Bill 2014. This is an act to amend the Freedom of Information legislation by including EirGrid as a public body to be covered under Freedom of Information. I think everybody agrees in the public that EirGrid should come within the scope of Freedom of Information. I can imagine nobody in their right mind should oppose this type of legislation. Not only will it be good for the public, but it will be good for EirGrid. It will be good for EirGrid to have how to make their decisions fully available for public scrutiny through the Freedom of Information. This is currently denied to them by the current legislation, and I want this new legislation I'm proposing here to correct this situation. Recently, we had on the GridLink project up to 35,000 submissions in relation to how EirGrid were proposing to act on this. If ever proof is required that the public want something to come into the public arena, that was proof of it. Those 35,000 people who made the submissions and that just particular one project have shown the public really need to know and are keen to know what is happening in EirGrid. The reason, Count Corla, I'm moving this legislation here today is because the government and Minister Howland specifically rejected this proposal before Christmas. In the committee stage of the Freedom of Information legislation, which came before the Select Committee before Christmas, I specifically put down an amendment that EirGrid be brought in under the Freedom of Information. Minister Howland rejected this flatly. I genuinely was surprised because I thought the Minister was committed to freedom of information. And this is what he gave us his reason on the record at the Select Committee when I put down my motion to include EirGrid under freedom of information. He replied by saying, EirGrid is regulated by the Commission for Energy Regulation, which means there is transparency into how the network business is regulated, and significant information is available on the regulator's website. Pathetic answer. Nonsense answer. I was waiting, like the ad we see on the television, for the big brick to come down and land on his head, because that was absolutely nonsense for him to say because it's a regulated entity it shouldn't come under freedom of information. I am giving the government an opportunity to reverse what they know was a wrong decision by the Minister and the government before Christmas. We did put down amendments for Irish Water on the same day, and the Minister and the government rejected them. But you have been forced, the government has been forced to reject its original approach and to agree to public pressure and especially to our legislation. And you have agreed that Irish Water should now come under freedom of information. You will do the same U-turn on EirGrid. It is not sustainable for anybody, any member of this House, to go out and tell the public EirGrid should not come under freedom of information. It's unsustainable. Accept this legislation. I actually believe you all know it's the right thing. Don't be guided by the mandarins or somebody who might tell you otherwise. EirGrid is effectively, in reality, a pylon company. That's what they see as their mission. They must change their approach and look at the underground option. They quoted in the past the cost of undergrounding was up to 20 times as high. Now they accept it's 3 times as high. The only conclusion you can draw from that is every single figure that EirGrid has ever given on this issue has been wrong and proven to be wrong, and this 3-time figure will be proven to be wrong again, and I can guarantee you before very long the underground option will be a cheaper option than the pylon option. Also, they have given wrong information to the Minister in this House about how long it fixes to fix a broken line underground, because they give the impression it takes 25 days. I asked them at a public hearing in Portlaoise before Christmas when they were going through a planning process, would there be a blackout? Or I should say it was my brother, a councillor, asked that question. They said, oh, there'd be no blackout if a cable underground broke, because we always lay a parallel cable and we just switch it over. So they've been peddling this nonsense. There could be power cuts if there's a break underground. And I don't believe the ministers were aware of the bad steer they were being getting. Finally, I want to say this expert panel that has been established, relying on EirGrid for information, that's not sufficient again. And they should have access to separate information. And the latest effort by EirGrid to buy off legitimate objections by communities all over Ireland will not work. It's an affront to the public to use the public money to buy off their objections, and we need to see how the board of EirGrid arrived at this conclusion that they thought we can buy off the public. It won't work. The public have no confidence in EirGrid. The public have no confidence in EirGrid, and the majority members of the government party don't have confidence in EirGrid either. Freedom of information will help the public process, it will help EirGrid, and I look forward to the government changing the view as you put through at the committee stage before Christmas to reject the proposal for EirGrid to come under freedom of information and to support my legislation here today to bring EirGrid under freedom of information. Thank you, Councillor.